everybody. Am I really here? Somebody say hi. All right, we're going to assume that I'm really here. Welcome. I am super excited to join you today, and I am going to share my presentation right now. How we doing? All right, friends. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, and welcome to this workshop. We are kicking off the day right at the top of this event, talking about conflict and de-escalation. And I know for many people, including me, conflict can be kind of scary sometimes, or draining, or upsetting. But I hope this session will leave you feeling energized and optimistic and confident about how to respond to conflict when it inevitably crops up in your community. I like to start with disclaimers, and I set this one up real well. The title of this talk has 5 words that I hope you will never use in conflict except to yourself. Telling someone else to calm down is a surefire way to make things worse and not better. So inside voice only for those first 5 words. All right, you with me? Okay. Then a few housekeeping notes. I am going to minimize chat. Bloop, minimized. Uh, but our MC Jamie is going to keep an eye on it and help surface questions for our Q&A. I usually relish taking questions in the moment, but I'll be honest, I've never successfully covered all of this content in this amount of time. So I'm going to try to be laser focused. I will have time for questions at the end, and the script for this talk with the bibliography is publicly available on my blog, and I'll share that link at the end as well. So this content arises from my 9 years of experience working in the WordPress open source project, where leaders are required to have complex and sometimes acrimonious conversations in public in a place where those conversations will be immortalized for as long as the archives last. So it behooves us to get really, really good at keeping discussions collaborative. And I should make clear, in WordPress, in open source, conflict, differences of opinion, these are not things to be eradicated. They're important tools, and we rely on them to help us make great software that powers 35% or more of the internet. So if we're going to build a platform that meets a broad scale of needs, we have to synthesize lots of different passionate opinions. So again, this talk isn't about eradicating conflict, but rather how to keep it productive by de-escalating it. Now, there is a lot we could discuss around how to manage conflict in a large public organization. But today, I just want to share some rubrics and some tools that can help you respond more effectively when disagreeing in a highly visible sphere. First off, we're going to talk about the base unit of conflict, the argument. So here is what makes up an argument. This happens to you as well when you're engaged in an argument, which is slightly different from a debate or friendly banter. There's a triggering event. Something happens that causes someone to perceive a threat. Perception is bolded here for a reason, right? The threat doesn't need to be true or real. It just has to be perceived. And that perception inspires defensive anger on behalf of one person. That person acts out due to that defensive anger, and then a new triggering event, and that acting out causes a new triggering event for somebody else. That person perceives a threat, that person acts out in defensive anger, back and forth, repeat until we all want to cry. Okay. So that's how that works. And we're going to talk about ways that we can intervene in various levels of that process. And of course, not all arguments or conflicts are created equal. Some are more severe than others. And I think it's really helpful to identify what makes conflicts more or less intense, and then some of the ways they can rise or fall in intensity. So let's take a look at that. Similar to hurricane scales, I use a 5-category rubric to talk about severity of conflict. The first one is difference. This is very manageable. In the difference level, the conflict level 1, 2 parties disagree on an issue, but feel no real discomfort about the disagreement. So this shows up when we're doing things like sports rivalries or food preferences, like I like toast, I like pancakes. The relationship is secure, you just happen to like different things. All right, that's a very comfortable space to be when you don't agree. A little less comfortable is conflict level 2, misunderstanding. One party understands something that the other party does not understand. Now, this usually results from miscommunication or lack of transparency. Sometimes it can get kicked up when rumors are flying around. It can be caused by a mistake or a misconception, but the thing that makes it a misunderstanding is that it can cause someone to call the terms of your relationship into question. So an example here would be, I thought we were meeting at 2 o'clock to discuss my presentation. I'm really nervous about it and you're not here. Do you even care about helping me? What happened? Right? Could have been a miscommunication. Maybe someone made a mistake and didn't show up when they should have, but it causes someone to question the terms of the relationship. But it can usually be clarified, right? And we can get out of this in a number of ways that you probably already know. Next level of disagreement or conflict is disagreement. This is a little bit more intense because there is no misunderstanding here. And this level of conflict, 2 parties see something differently, regardless of how well they understand the other's position, right? So I understand exactly what you believe. I just don't think you're right. You understand exactly what I think, but you think I'm wrong too, right? That could be a difference, except at this level, one or both of us is uncomfortable about the fact that we have a difference here. This can sometimes be caused because one party has positional authority over the other. Maybe I'm your boss or you're my boss, and I'm like, oh, shoot, if we don't agree about this, now what? And that level of disagreement with the discomfort can result in a reassessment of the relationship's future. Getting a little more tense now, we have discord. Now, discord usually results from one person or party identifying a pattern or a trend of disagreement. So this we hit here when we have multiple disagreements in a row. And we know that we're reaching discord because we start not being able to have productive communication or collaboration in things that we already agree on, right? Discord causes difficulties in the relationship of the involved parties, even outside of the original conflict. And the relationship is strained as a result, and it's difficult to recover from this level. But even more difficult to recover from is polarization. At this stage, the relationship is actively hostile or estranged. Signs of polarization might include refusal to engage in constructive behaviors. So, for example, creating solutions, reaching out, taking a different perspective, and a high volume of effort or commitment to defending a position or making a case. And sometimes that like laser focus on like, no, I need to be right results in recruitment or picking sides, like getting everyone like, come on, we're going to fix them or vanquish them or something, right? At polarization, we have severe negative emotions and severe negative behavior with little or no hope. for interest in reconciliation. It's really hard to come back from this level. We really try to avoid it. All right, so here's all those conflict severity levels in order. And now we understand that conflict can move up and down these levels, escalating and de-escalating over time or depending on what we all do, right? Our jobs as leaders in our communities is not to remove all this conflict. As mentioned, conflict is a valuable tool that helps us make better decisions that benefit more people. But because the higher up in the conflict severity level we go, the less collaborative we are. It serves us to prevent conflict from escalating to the point that it breaks the relationships that we rely on to collaborate. So basically, we want to keep all of our conflict kind of at 3 or under, preferably 1 or 2, right? So let's talk about ways that conflict moves up and down the scale. First up in our escalating factors is making it personal. Making it personal converts a difference of opinion or perspective into an attack. This comes up with stuff like, oh, you're the kind of person who, or, well, if you have low standards, or if you're just ignorant, I guess, or stuff like this, right? Don't do it. Don't fall for it. If you don't make it personal, you're bringing it back down. All right. Next up, when we see that pattern in a conflict partner's behavior or opinion, this is a classic escalating factor. Think about it. If you start to think that someone's never going to agree with you ever, it changes your understanding of the future of the relationship, right? When differences mount up, you start to wonder whether you have anything in common with this person. And that can really kick you up. Again, remember how discomfort with the escalating factor. Being uncomfortable about the conflict is another classic escalating factor, right? And again, especially if the person that you're in conflict with has more positional authority than you do. When my boss comes to me and says, I don't think you did a good job there. I disagree with your approach. Like my emotions are engaged. That gets me a lot more than when my daughter comes to me and says, I don't like what you did there, Mom. And this is why, so like that level of comfort with conflict is why leaders and other community-focused people spend so much time building and fostering positive relationships, right? When I have psychological safety, I am less uncomfortable with conflict. But lack of psychological safety results in discomfort or distrust. That will take a simple difference all the way up into disagreement or even jumping up into discord real quick. And then, of course, associating a high level of risk or serious consequences connected to the issue, this really escalates a conversation fast. When the stakes are high, emotions run high too, right? You're much more likely to get in and have a knockdown, drag-out fight over losing something like your house than you are over losing something like your pen, right? So when we're talking about highly consequential topics or topics that really touch someone deeply in their personal lives, you need to plan how you're going in there, right? Because you're already up a couple levels from go. All right. And then finally, rapid rates of interaction. And this is something that is a danger in especially online interaction, because you can get into a quick back and forth really, really fast. And as you remember from that anatomy of an argument, or if you imagine like a bar fight or something like that, where you have the, well, oh yeah, well, you're wrong, well, you're wrong? And that back and forth tends to escalate because our emotions get involved, right? Our adrenaline starts going and we start really being at the mercy of fight or flight, mostly fight. Now, sometimes it is necessary to respond quickly to a complaint, but don't wade in to like constant volleying. And also keep in mind your level of alarm and urgency as a leader when responding to a conflict may not match the urgency that onlookers have. When in doubt, when you can, go slow. I promise it helps. All right. So that's a lot of ways things can get more tense. And if you're anything like me, you're a little more tense right now, right? So let's talk through our list of ways to bring things down a notch or 5. First, identify common ground. You can really shore up a relationship a lot by refocusing on the things that unite you. If someone is part of your community, something brought you all together. You have a shared interest, a shared goal, hopefully both. By pulling that foundational agreement, that thing that brought you together in the first place, into focus, you can bring peace closer to your conversation. So always keep those unifying factors close, top of mind, right? Another idea, focus on the issue rather than the people. Now, this factor is like the flip side to making it personal, right? When we are clear that everyone in this conversation is a good person who belongs and is accepted, no matter what the outcome of the discussion, then we can navigate away from rage and hurtful words and toward finding some level of agreement or at least less tension, right? A lot of what escalates people is their fear that based on the difference, they will be ejected from the community. And sometimes, I mean, certainly if someone is behaving in an abusive or dysfunctional way in the community, that might need to be a conversation, right? But if we're just talking about differences, but we're really, but we start making it personal, that can make things escalate unnecessarily. All right, similar to keeping a focus on the issues, it really helps us to avoid talking about positions, but instead making it clear how your perspective is informed by your interests. And your conflict partner, this is a good way to find another kind of level of common ground. Your conflict partner may share the same interest, even when you and your partner find yourself in different positions on an issue. So again, take a look at like, okay, what are we both interested in here, and approach it from that perspective. All right. And that embracing of differences or opinions or styles or experiences can be a really wonderful kind of way to bring down the intensity level of a conflict. This is an important leadership opportunity in a community space. By consistently highlighting what differences are welcome in your space and where, you can create the psychological safety in your group that allows people to tolerate multiple cases of differences. This, plus constantly coming back to your common ground, can really help conflict stay manageable and even friendly. This can bring you all the way back down into differences, friendly, comrade-like differences. All right, and then kind of with that same kind of hand in hand with that previous de-escalating factor, making the effort to understand all sides. And then, of course, you got to do the work, right? You have to do the work to understand your conflict partner's perspective with courage, with empathy, with compassion, and with curiosity. I know that it's hard to get curious when we're upset, but that's the job, right? Make the effort to understand all sides. When people see you making the effort, it lets them relax as well. shows respect. And then finally, that antidote to that quick back and forth, whatever you can do to make it possible for the conversation to slow down, to allow you and other people's good sense to catch up with their mouths or keyboard, that will help reduce the severity of the conflict. A bookmarking response of like, hey, you've got my attention. I need to go and find some answers. So bear with me. I will be back. You do actually have to come back. Don't lie. That is a good way to keep the conversation from spiraling out of control while slowing it down so that everyone can revisit with cooler heads. So that's a bunch of ways that we can kind of bring down the level. But it's also important to remember communication environments can really affect your ability to de-escalate or resolve a conflict. So let's make it pretty explicit where and in what environment you can more easily de-escalate. All right, here is one of my more word-heavy slides. And this is strongly informed by the way we do things in WordPress. In your community, you may have different communication kind of platforms and methods and spaces. But as you can see, your ability to de-escalate depends on the severity of the conflict, but also where the conflict is happening. When someone publicly states an opinion and puts their, flag in the ground, it's much harder for them to change that position later. The more privacy there is in communication, the more flexibility you give your conflict partner. Now, that said, any text-based discussion is not private on the internet. I don't care if it says private message. I don't care if it says direct message. Anything you write down and send to someone else, with very, very few exceptions, should be something you're okay to see posted on a news site or screen capped to all of the people that you've been fighting with for your entire life, okay? If it's going to be taken out of context, if it's something that you're going to regret saying later, don't say it. Type it, but don't send it. I don't care what you do. Anything you send in text is subject to be shared. And as you can also see from this slide, your ability to de-escalate, the best place to de-escalate is before we start talking or before the conversation goes public. So if you know something is going to be controversial or inspiring of conflict or really get a particular community member's goat, get in front of it by making a strategy and doing some pre-communicating with those influential stakeholders so that you can talk it out, hash it out before it hits Twitter or we all start getting upset. Okay? But that's all prevention, and we're not talking about prevention today. That's a different talk. Today, we're talking about responding. So I'd like to cover a 5-step formula that I have for responding to conflict. Let's get started. I like a checklist, especially when my emotions are running high. This is mine, and we're going to go through them one by one. First step, compose yourself. Take stock of your emotional reaction. You see the message and you're like, or maybe you're like, or maybe you're like, those are your 3 options, by the way. Fight, flight, or freeze, generally speaking. And ask yourself some questions. What am I feeling in my body? What do these sensations tell me about my emotional state? What am I thinking? What conclusions am I making based on my emotions? If you're not calm, and you're probably not, how can I best calm down? When your emotions are driving the bus, you're not doing your best work. So here are some reminders I use and we use in my teams at WordPress. Feedback is better than indifference. The worst, it's one thing to have people say, I hate what you're doing, but it's another thing if they don't even care. right? Another reminder, lack of dissent equals monoculture, which equals obsolescence, right? You want that conflict. You want those differences so that you can make something that works for more people. Another reminder, you don't have to win. You're not here to change someone's mind. You're here to understand. And then another reminder we use, at least in the software world, most of us, at least in WordPress, we are not saving lives here. We're just writing software or communicating about it or something. So kind of recontextualizing the conflict to identify, like, are we really talking about something that should be causing this much adrenaline in my body? And then for survivors of trauma, and a lot of us out there in community are, sometimes your brain can trick you into thinking that you're literally not safe. So sometimes those of us who have survived trauma in our past, we need to remind ourselves, whoa, okay, I am safe. I'm not in danger. No one's going to reach through the screen and grab me. I'm okay. All right. So once we've brought ourselves down a little bit, we need to bring ourselves down a little more. A next step is to analyze the message and empathize with the person sending it. Ask yourself some questions. And this is a really important step, probably the most important, because this step helps you awaken your curiosity. And curiosity is one of the most important ways to de-escalate yourself so that you can de-escalate a situation, right? So ask yourself some questions. Why did this person take time to write this? What emotion fueled them? Where are they coming from? What's their goal? What do we have in common? There's always something, I promise. This is a tough one, master's level, what do I admire about them? What about their message could inspire admiration in me? And then finally, this is doctorate level. What is my part in this? How am I participating in this conflict? How could I be contributing to this situation? All right, next step after we've gotten real curious is to contextualize. Figure out, where does this conflict belong in the landscape of this community and the people involved in it? What people are affected? What people might agree with this person? How widespread is this opinion or conflict? What is the root cause? Frequently, a conflict will spark up that is actually, it will spark up over here, but it actually means stuff over here is wrong, right? So see if you can identify the root cause of this agreement and go to the root whenever you can. And then ask yourself, what is my relationship with this person? And thus, what is my ability to de-escalate? Remember, if you don't have trust with that person, probably you're not the best person to de-escalate if you have another option, right? So figure out the context in which this conflict lives first. Get the lay of the land. And then, even more important, figure out what your strategy is, right? What is your desired outcome? Because here's the thing. Based on your understanding of that context, it's very possible that you don't need to be involved here, right? Just because a conflict is happening doesn't mean that you have to jump on it every time or that you are the right person to respond. The first thing you need to do, and please, please, please don't wade into an acrimonious discussion unless you know what you want to accomplish. What do you want to happen that isn't happening now? Do you need to respond at all? Will a response make things better? If so, who could respond most effectively? And then should you activate one person or a group of people if you're lucky enough to have a group? What are the risks associated with your response? That's an important one too, right? Don't wade in and say, I know the answer, unless you've thought, okay, well, if I say this, then they might say this, and what would I say then? Oh, okay, so I've got a plan there. If I say this and they say that, what would I do in that case? Is my argument here weak? Should I even make that argument? Should I leave that alone, right? Identify the risks associated with your response and then figure out how you can offset them. And then finally, the fifth step, after you've done all those things, my friend, then you can mobilize. At this point, you can, if you need to talk to people about it, if you're lucky enough to have a team to discuss or talk through it, talk to your team, share your analysis and your strategy with them, get some feedback. Draft a response. If you don't have a team, draft a response and leave it alone for a while if you've successfully slowed down the conversation, and then bring back. But make sure it reflects your strategy. Ask for help in reviewing your draft if it's not coming easy. If you're having trouble writing it, you're probably still really upset, right? So get some feedback on it. And then repeat as necessary. I know that sounds like a lot of steps, but once you get used to doing it, it goes a lot faster. The compose yourself and analyze can happen within, once you practice, can happen within 3 or 4 minutes once you get really good at it. Practice makes perfect here. All right, I'm going to give you some rapid fire tips before we wind up and I take some questions. Don't lie or misrepresent the facts. This is super tempting, especially for entry-level and sometimes mid-level community managers. Lies or misrepresentations of the facts to get out of a temporary conflict always backfires. It will damage your credibility. The risks outweigh the rewards. Even if the truth makes you look bad or dumb, you got to go with the truth and then apologize and make amends if you screwed it up. Do intervene in a discussion when civility, fairness, or safety are threatened. Or if a relevant fact is misstated, do intervene then too. We get real wrapped up, especially when we're on the internet, by kind of intelligence signaling, right? So share a fact that people are missing if it's relevant or productive, not just to show that you're smart. And keep in mind, whatever levels of civility or fairness that we tolerate, that becomes your community's new behavioral norm. So when conversations delve into name calling or abusive behavior, you got to get in there. Avoiding you statements is kind of a trick for keeping it out of the personal realm. Using we, if you can, if it doesn't sound trite, can kind of build rapport. So instead of saying something like, well, if you want to accomplish this, you should consider, I like to use things like, if we wanted to accomplish this, then we would need to consider these factors. Or even if we're too far apart for me to legitimately call us a group, then I will make it kind of third party. Someone trying to accomplish this might benefit from considering these factors. But a lot of you ends up sounding like finger pointing. Don't try to win an argument on the internet, my friends. Just don't do it. 99.99999% of the time, your true goal is to understand the other person, not to prove them wrong. You're never going to make friends by making someone look like an idiot on the web. To find that common ground, I like to use the visualization of like zooming out. Go back, step back from the situation to find your common ground with the other person. Sometimes in rough moments, the common ground for me is, well, we're both on this planet. I bet we both breathe oxygen. That's a good starting point. Be nice to people for no good reason. It makes your community better, and it comes back to you in spades. This is a good one for text communication. Try to limit the length of your response. My rule of thumb is no more than twice the length of the other party's comment. So if they gave you one paragraph about this big, never go more than double that. Drowning people in information comes across as condescending or aggressive really easily, so avoid it. And in that same vein, In text interactions, especially asynchronous conversations, you only really get 1 or 2 chances at eliciting more information, asking questions, without also giving information before you sound like you're interrogating someone or before you sound false or deceptive. So share and invite sharing. And then finally, use active listening. When you can have direct communication with someone on video or in person, start by listening. When you are in a position of low privilege, I encourage you to speak up. And if you're a leader and therefore have high privilege in your community, listen up first. It will always get you farther than talking to people nonstop. All right, my friends, it is time for questions. Somebody boss me around. Jamie, I think this is the moment where you get in here and say, Andrea, what about this?
Hey.
Hi.
All right. Yeah, we've had some loads of good chat. Everyone's really enjoyed the session. So well done. Really interesting. So the question that has come up, which seemed to get a bit of debate going, was around what do you do if you're not safe? For example, if there's a risk to your livelihood speaking up or providing feedback, what strategies are available when the sides feel unequal?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. I think if you are certainly don't put yourself at risk if the risks outweigh the rewards. But if you're in a position where your livelihood requires you to engage in unethical communication, I think that needs to get solved at that point, right? So if your job requires you to lie or bully people, I encourage you to leave that job. And if you're engaging in a community space where you are being lied to or being bullied, I'm thinking that's the question we're asking because we're talking about safety on the internet in conflict conversations. My best advice is to get out of there. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Another one was around a bit of debate, speed of response versus giving a bit of a bland statement or a corporate statement. So Denise Henkel had asked this, you should probably go back quickly. So what do you do if you're trying to calm yourself down and take the steps that you've suggested?
Yeah, this one really gets people's attention. Okay, so a couple of things here. Practice calming yourself down fast, right? Because the best way to get to wade into a fray without having your emotions driving your responses is to get really good at recentering, grounding yourself, and having a strategy, right? But I encourage you to avoid thinking that a little bit of piling on is a disaster. Like I definitely and I don't recommend that kind of bookmarking response. Don't make that false sounding or corporate sounding. Like make it your honest information. I usually keep the register pretty low, like the formality pretty low. Like I'll throw a couple oh gosh, I didn't expect this, but I'm, express your commitment at helping people work out the situation. But I think it is also allowed to let people be mad and then let them come back from that mad, right? In our community, at least, people are fairly forgiving of words spoken in anger, either going away or getting apologized for, although it's always harder to get that kind of peace once people have said, you're the worst and you should go away forever. But I really find that sometimes hot discussions like that will kind of burn themselves out. So, and to be quite candid, like you don't always get it right, right? So sometimes I'll wait in there thinking like, no, this is an emergency. And then I'll look back at it later and I was like, oh, that wasn't an emergency. I was just real worried. So, and then sometimes I will take a long time to get involved and realize, oh shoot, I didn't hop in here fast enough. But never, like when, if you're engaging in a conflict communication and you feel that kind of sensation of being compelled, right? Like that XKCD, what is it, like 386 or something, like someone's wrong on the internet. That sensation should tell you like, whoa, I'm not doing my best work here, right? And so it's always worth slowing down so that you don't screw it up worse, rather than getting in there and fighting to avoid some other thing. Don't be the person who makes it worse. Give people some space is my best recommendation there.
Great. So we got a couple of minutes. We had an early question from Rachel, and it caused a little bit of debate around the use of the word conflict. So what she said was, by this logic, using your scale, your five levels, it means all healthy debate comes under conflict level 1, and we need healthy debate at work. So yeah, what's your thoughts on the connotations of the word conflict and the use of that word?
I get, yeah, the term conflict is a little bit, gets people's attention, certainly. And I'm actually, I don't like conflict. Like I took on this work, absolutely hating fighting with people. It constantly inspires the fear response in me every time. And so like, I mean, and so I actually use the word conflict in a non-pejorative way intentionally to help myself desensitize to that fear of, oh, we're fighting. Oh no. But yeah, like leaning in to that, like, hey, we all aren't the same, and that's good, can have a lot of great kind of side effects. One can be kind of desensitizing other people in your community who are afraid of disagreements or differences, right? And another is that it can kind of facilitate your creation of a more inclusive and welcoming space. It's our brains like to find sameness, right? That's how we create groups together. And we look for sameness and we stick with it. And so we're constantly trying to get our brains away from that default of like only be with people who agree with me about everything. Right. Part of being kind of having our logic brains driving the bus is saying, okay, well, let me go find somebody who doesn't agree with me so they can help make my set of positions smarter and better. But if using the word conflict is going to scare the pants off somebody, I won't do it in a communication. Like I will very intentionally use the terms like, oh, looks like we have a difference of opinion, or, oh, that's so interesting. I never thought of that from that perspective. Can you teach me more about what's inspiring this perspective from you? And approach it much more like, oh, a facet of this issue rather than lack of alignment, right? But the using the term conflict for me, and kind of in this community of people who have taken on the heavy responsibility of encouraging people to be their best selves in a group on the internet, which is like the hardest place to be your best self. I think it's important that we get comfortable with conflict so it doesn't trigger us so hard when it crops up. So.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Everyone's really appreciative of your time. I'm sure you're going to have lots of people contacting you when they have their next round of conflict.
I'm super geeky about this. I will say, like, on my slide there, I have almost the exact script of this talk on my blog. So just go, it's not on the main nav right now because for reasons, but the page is available, and I have a great list of books that really helped me. There's not a lot of books on online conflict, on ways to de-escalate conflict online. I've taken a lot of in-person books and translated them to online interaction, but happy to talk more about this with anybody. I get super passionate about this.
People have thrown out a few books in the chat as well, so
yay.
Great.
I love it.
So thanks everyone for coming along. Thank you, Andrea.